I recently came face to face with something I used to only joke about. A neighbor so unhinged, so power-drunk in her tiny little role, that she thought she could rewrite the law and rewrite my life. The HOA president, Karen Truman, decided my Mustang was fair game. Her play? She reported it as stolen so she could get it towed right out of my driveway. And when she was caught, her righteous excuse was just enforcing the bylaws. But what Karen didn't see coming, what she couldn't even imagine, was that in the end, I'd be the one enforcing the actual law. Not her, not her little clipboard, not her fake violations. Me. Now, before we get any further, let me back it up so you understand how this war started. And make no mistake, it became a war. My name is Frank Dillon. My badge says Chief. Decades of service. 30 years in the city trenches. But around here, in this quiet slice of suburbia, where HOA rules mattered more than common sense, I'm just Frank. I like it that way. No interviews, no attention. The silence in this neighborhood was supposed to be my reward after years of sirens and politics. That's why Gina, my wife, and I bought this place. It had what we wanted. A 2-car garage, a square little yard, some friendly neighbors who waved when they walked their dogs, and most importantly, peace. The kind of peace you hear when you cut the lawn on a Saturday morning, then sit down after with cold lemonade. But of course, peace has one enemy, and her name was Karen Truman. Mid-40s, walking around like she was chosen by God to rule the cul-de-sac, gripping her clipboard like a queen clutching her crown. She had the kind of smile that pinched at the edges, a smile stretched too thin, like a rubber band ready to snap at your neck. She called herself president of the Homeowners Association. I called her what she really was, a bully wrapped in pearls. All I wanted was to cut my grass, tend my garage, and maybe finally get my father's car running again. That car isn't just steel and paint to me, it's history. A 1969 Mustang Boss 429, candy apple red. Built right, built strong. My father bought it brand new with money he saved from working overtime shifts. Cash on the table so nobody could ever take it from him. Every Sunday he polished it until the chrome dazzled like mirrors. That Mustang was his pride. When he passed, it became mine. Not just a car, it became memory, heritage, a living thread tying us together. I don't care that it hadn't moved in years. To me, it wasn't sitting idle. It was waiting. To Karen, it was an HOA violation. Section 8, paragraph 3, subsection C, non-operational vehicles parked in view. But notice the language, how it looks, not if it runs. It wasn't law, it was her weapon. To her, my Mustang wasn't a car. It was leverage. I'll never forget her first strike. It came at the annual HOA barbecue. I was standing by the potato salad, keeping to myself, when she swooped in like a hawk, clipboard in hand, her son George trailing behind her with his slouched shoulders. George, lazy frame, weak chin, looked like life had never once handed him a callus because Karen kept his world bubble-wrapped. His eyes, though, locked right where hers had. On the Mustang. Mr. Dillon. Karen purred, but with enough venom to sting. That vehicle hasn't budged in weeks. The bylaws are clear, I smiled politely. It's a project car, Mrs. Truman, a classic. George, maybe wanting to impress me, blurted out, voice cracking like a teenager's. A Boss 429, isn't it? That's a rare motor. Real deal, Carcraft build. I raised an eyebrow, surprised he even knew. That's right. Built right, built to last. George leaned in, hungry. You ever think about selling? Karen's hand shot to his chest, nails digging in to silence him. George? She snapped, eyes never leaving mine. We are discussing a violation, not a marketplace. But her eyes drifted toward the garage in a way that betrayed her calculation. Not concern, not outrage, hunger. She gave me 7 days. 7 days to remove my father's legacy or face consequences. Her voice dripped false sweetness, like bleach disguised as sugar. And then the papers began. Late fee notices on my windshield. Fees that weren't logged anywhere on the HOA portal. Sloppy signatures, even misspelled names. Same notice slapped against the door of old Mrs. Alvarez, a 78-year-old widow down the street. They threatened to put a lien on her house for $25. 25. Petty intimidation disguised as procedure. I ignored it at first, filed them away, but then everything boiled over. That morning, the pounding on my door started before Dawn had finished stretching. Not a knock, a pounding. Gina was already up, her tea steaming, her eyes on her array of monitors, the setup she built for herself in the office. She was my strategist, always 3 steps ahead. She watched me pull on jeans and a shirt and just mouthed one word, showtime. I opened the door. Karen stood there like a villain rehearsed for the stage, clipboard in hand, smug smile carved into her face. George trailing behind her, jittery with anticipation like a kid on Christmas morning. "Frank," she said, dropping the Mr. Dillon with the casual cruelty of someone straining for control. "I'm afraid this is the end of the line. Your vehicle is being impounded." I filled the doorway, arms crossed. Calm, broad, unmoved. "Is that so, Karen? And on what grounds?" She tapped her clipboard like a magician revealing a trick. "Violation 8.3c. I also had a discussion with a friend at the DMV. Seems your Mustang's registration is expired. That car is abandoned property, in public view. I've already reported it as stolen. Officers are on their way." That's when cold anger slid into my chest. Not panic, anger. She had not only twisted misinformation, she'd tied up 911 over my father's car. The arrogance left me stunned for a split second. But I knew my rule. Never let them see fear. "You called the police," I said, my voice low enough to cut wood. "You wasted emergency response, reporting a dispute about a car as theft?" George puffed up behind her like a rooster. "It's not just a dispute. It's the law!" And right on cue, sirens wailed around the corner. 2 police units screeched up, and 4 officers piled out fast. I knew every one of them. Rookie Miller, still green, nervous, jumpy, and Sergeant Davis solid, all business. I had pinned Miller's badge at graduation just 6 months ago. Davis scanned the yard, hand perched on his sidearm, eyes on me. "Sir," he called sharply, gaze sliding past me to the covered hump of red steel in the garage. "Report of a stolen vehicle, Mustang, location confirmed. Is that the one?" Karen rushed forward eagerly, pointing with theater. "That's it, officer. That's the stolen car, right there. Hidden in his garage." Miller looked uncertain, fidgeting, but Davis focused on me. "Sir, I'll need to see identification and paperwork for the vehicle." Slowly, I reached for my wallet. I saw Miller's hand twitch toward his weapon. Rookie nerves. So I moved deliberately, so slowly you'd think I was underwater. Karen's grin split wide. In her head, she'd already won. She thought I'd be in cuffs before breakfast. But I didn't pull a driver's license. I flipped the wallet open to gold, my badge. The rising sun flashed against it. "Sergeant Davis," I said evenly. "I believe there's been a mistake." His eyes narrowed, leaned closer. Then recognition hit him like lightning. His spine snapped to steel. His voice cracked. "Chief Dillon, I had no idea." Miller's face blanched. He stammered, gears turning in his mind, finally blurting out a single word. "Chief?" Karen's smile drained to ash. George froze in place. I stared at Davis, but spoke loud enough for the entire neighborhood to hear. "Seems Mrs. Truman here made a criminal false report. Filing fake claims? Abusing 911. Pulling you off real emergencies." My gaze cut to Karen, eyes locked. "That's a serious offense, ma'am." In that second she knew. The predator had become prey. She'd tried to use my own weapon, law enforcement, against me, and she had failed spectacularly. What she didn't realize then was worse. She'd exposed herself. She revealed her tactics, her desperation. And this was just the beginning. The fallout rolled across the block quietly. Cops filed their reports. Neighbors peeked through curtains. By the time patrol units pulled away, whispers had already spread like wildfire. That night, Gina and I sat with maps of the community glowing on her laptop. Every board member's house marked in red. "She won't stop," Gina said calmly, sipping wine. "People like her never retreat. They escalate." And she was right. I'd seen it my whole career. Bullies don't hear apologies. They only respect force. Problem was, I couldn't use the official force of the badge anymore. This wasn't my precinct. This was my home. So I had to play a different game. And the very next morning, Karen escalated. The first ticket appeared on the Mustang. Heavy paper. HOA logo stamped in the corner. Fake fine for excessive chrome glare. $50. Ridiculous, but brilliantly bold. A few days later came the chalk. My driveway marked off like a crime scene. Only it wasn't just tire outlines. It was a complete tracing of the Mustang itself. Full shape, arrows marking imaginary violations, sprayed in bold pink letters across the asphalt. Loud enough for every neighbor to see. Violation area. With little arrows pointing to it and the words, "Violation area," stankled in bright pink. It was childish, but also deeply invasive. Someone had been on my property in the middle of the night, kneeling on my concrete. I got out a tape measure. The city ordinance requires a vehicle to be parked at least 5 ft from the public sidewalk. My car was parked at 6 1/2 ft. Her chalk lines were deliberately drawn to make it look like I was over the line. I took photos, logged them, and then washed the chalk away with a garden hose. Neighbor Tony, who was out walking his beagle, shook his head. "She's a piece of work, that one," he muttered. Last year she tried to find me because my garden gnome was non-compliant with neighborhood aesthetic standards. The drone was the next escalation. It was a small consumer-grade quadcopter, but it was relentless. At dawn, it hovered by our bedroom window, a black, unblinking eye. It buzzed Gina in the garden, shadowed me at the mailbox. A constant buzzing high-tech pest. This was Gina's territory. DJI Mavic 3, she announced one afternoon, not even looking up from her screen. Signal originates from 114 Willow Lane, the Truman residence. It's registered to George. She cracked a rare, dangerous smile. And its flight path has crossed our property line 17 times in the last 2 days and over our windows. State peeping and nuisance laws don't love that. It was time for some small legal counterpranks. I wasn't going to sink to her level, but I wasn't going to be a passive victim either. My response had to be methodical, legal, and just a little bit sarcastic. The first was the sprinklers. I reprogrammed my irrigation system. The next time the drone made a low pass over the Mustang, 3 sprinkler heads popped up and fired a coordinated high-pressure volley of water directly at it. The drone sputtered, wobbled, and made a hasty retreat, dripping all the way back to the Truman house. It didn't come back for 2 days. Next, I took a page from her own book, The Bylaws. I spent a Saturday morning reading the entire 100-page document. It was a masterpiece of bureaucratic nonsense full of rules about everything from the color of your mailbox to the species of your shrubs. Tucked away in the landscaping section was a clause requiring all front-facing flora to be native to the state. Karen Truman's prize-winning, perfectly manicured rose bushes, the ones that had 1 yard of the month 3 times in a row, were a French hybrid. They were not in any way native. I filed an official anonymous complaint through the HOA's online portal, complete with photographic evidence and a link to the state's agricultural website. 2 weeks later, a landscaping crew arrived at her house and, to her shrieking protests, dug up every single one of her precious roses. My final counter-move was the most passive-aggressive. I bought a new, even bigger, even softer car cover for the Mustang, but this one was custom-printed. On the side, in giant friendly 2FT high letters, it said, "Project in progress. Ask me about it." It turned her symbol of my non-compliance into a friendly neighborhood conversation piece. People would stop and ask. I'd tell them about my dad, about the engine, about how I hoped to have it running by spring. I was turning her weapon against her, using it to build goodwill with the very neighbors she was trying to turn on me. But all of this was just a game, a suburban Cold War. It was annoying, but it wasn't dangerous. That changed when neighbor Tony's truck disappeared. It was a 20-year-old Ford F-150, rusted in places, but it was his livelihood. He was a handyman, and all his tools were in the back. He came to my door one morning looking panicked. "Frank, it's gone. My truck. I parked it right there last night. Now it's just gone." There was no broken glass, no sign of a struggle, just an empty space at the curb. He said he'd gotten an HOA violation notice a week ago for a small oil leak on the pavement, a spot no bigger than a quarter. He'd cleaned it up, but the notice said if it wasn't rectified, the vehicle could be towed. He thought it was just a threat. I made some quiet calls. The truck wasn't in the city impound lot. None of the major local towing companies had a record of it. It had simply vanished. Gina, meanwhile, was digging. She cross-referenced HOA complaints with police reports. Over the last year, a pattern emerged. 10 other residents had reported vehicles towed for minor, often bogus HOA violations. The cars were never recovered. They were all older models. Nothing flashy, but all of them were owned outright. No pesky line holders to notify. And every single tow had been authorized by the same small company, Reliable Roadside Recovery, a company that, according to its business license, was owned by a holding corporation. And that holding corporation was owned by a much larger firm, Oakwood Development Group, the same developer that was currently building the new multi-million-dollar Phase 4 of our subdivision, a project that had been controversially fast-tracked by Karen Truman and the HOA board. The petty harassment wasn't just petty anymore. It was a cover for something much bigger. My Mustang wasn't the prize. It was the excuse. They were running a shakedown, using the HOA bylaws as a legal crowbar to steal cars, and I had a sickening feeling I knew exactly where they were going. The discovery of the tow ring shakedown changed everything. This was no longer a spat with a power-tripping HOA president. It was a criminal conspiracy. Neighbor Tony was heartbroken over his truck and furious. All my tools, Frank, my ladders, my saws, that's how I make a living. I saw the desperation in his eyes, and it solidified my resolve. Karen Truman and her cronies had crossed a line from petty tyranny to grand larceny. My world-weary cynicism was being burned away by a cold, hard anger. This was my watch, and I wouldn't stand by while people like Tony got hit. Gina worked her magic. She pulled the corporate filings for Reliable Roadside Recovery. It was a ghost company, a single post office box for an address and a burner phone for a contact number. But the payments to the company came from Oakwood Development. And more importantly, Gina dug into the tow company's GPS data using a backdoor she had from an old cybercrime case. Most of their tows ended in one location, a sprawling anonymous self-storage facility out by the county line called Secure Store. "They're not taking them to HOA Scrapyard," she said, pointing at a cluster of data points on the screen. "They're taking them here multiple trips a week, always after midnight." It was a classic car theft playbook. Tow the vehicle, stick it in a secure location to cool off, swap the vehicle identification number and plates, and then sell it clean to an unsuspecting buyer, or chop it for parts. The developer connection was the missing piece. Oakwood likely needed a fleet of work trucks for their new construction phase. And what's cheaper than buying them? Stealing them from the very neighborhood they were building in, using their puppet HOA as the muscle. It was disgustingly efficient. I couldn't use a full police task force, not yet. An official investigation would tip them off, and they'd scatter like cockroaches. This needed a quiet touch. I called in one person I trusted implicitly, Sergeant Davis. He still felt guilty about the 9/11 call and was eager to make things right. I met him and Gina in my garage, the red Mustang standing silent witness. "This is completely off the books," I told him. "No warrants, no official reports. We're just three concerned citizens going for a look." Davis nodded, his face grim. "Whatever you need, Chief." The plan was simple. We needed to get inside that storage facility and ideally inside one of their units. Gina had already hacked Secure Store's pathetic security system, giving her access to their gate logs and surveillance cameras. She identified the unit the tow trucks visited most often, C-17. Davis and I would go in. We took my personal beat-up pickup truck, not my department-issued SUV. Davis unscrewed the license plates in my driveway and swapped them with a set from an old junked car he had on his property. They were department test plates on loan, legally valid for on-road vehicle testing during plainclothes operations. It was a small detail, but in this line of work, small details keep you out of trouble. We drove to Secure Store after dark. The place was a maze of identical corrugated steel doors under the harsh glare of sodium vapor lamps. Gina crackled in our ears. "Gate camera on a 5-minute loop. Northwest blind spot, you've got 20 minutes. The gate groaned open. We slipped in dark and parked in the blind. The air was cold and smelled of dust and rust. We found Unit C-17 at the end of a long, dark row. It had a heavy-duty padlock on it. Davis pulled a small toolkit from his jacket. He was an old-school cop who'd come up when knowing how to pick a lock was as important as knowing how to shoot. He went to work, his movements quick and professional. I stood watch, listening to the silence, every distant sound making the hair on my arms stand up. After a tense minute, the lock clicked open. Davis slid the heavy door up just enough for us to slip underneath. He followed me in and we pulled it shut behind us, plunging us into absolute darkness. I clicked on a small penlight. The beam cut through the dark, revealing the truth. It was a chop shop. Tony's F-150 was there, parked in the back, but it was already being stripped. The doors were off, the engine block hoisted on a chain. Dozens of license plates from 5 states lined the wall. On a makeshift bench under a dim lamp sat a stack of paperwork. I walked over, my light tracing over the documents. They were forged to authorizations, each one detailed a bogus HOA violation. Oil stains, flat tires, expired tags, and was signed at the bottom. Most of the signatures were a messy scrawl, but one on a form authorizing the tow of a 10-year-old minivan was perfectly chillingly clear. It was Karen Truman's elegant looping signature, but the real prize was underneath that stack. It was a binder full of blank vehicle titles and a professional-grade printing kit for creating new VIN plates. This was a sophisticated operation, and sitting right next to the printer was a receipt book. It detailed payments made to an individual for consulting services. The payments were weekly, always in cash, and always signed for by the same person, Barry Jenkins, the treasurer of our HOA. Davis let out a low whistle. "They've got the whole board in on it." "Not the whole board," I said, thinking. "Just the ones who handle the money and the enforcement. Karen and her treasurer, Barry. We photographed everything with our phones. Cars, plates, forged documents, the receipt book. We didn't take a thing. We had the whole conspiracy from petty fines to industrial car theft. We worked quickly, the minutes ticking by." Gina's voice came over the comms. "Guard's finishing his round. You need to be out of there in 2 minutes." We slipped back out, replaced the lock, and were driving away before the guard's golf cart even turned down our aisle. Driving back home, the adrenaline started to fade, replaced by a grim sense of purpose. We had the evidence, but it was all illegally obtained. Truth without a warrant is just trivia. We needed to find a way to make it all admissible. To turn our covert recon into a prosecutable case, we needed a trigger, something that would let us get a real warrant and kick down the door legally. We had poked the hornet's nest. Now we had to figure out how to get the hornets to fly out into the open, right into our trap. The evidence from the storage unit was a bombshell, but it was also a hand grenade with the pin pulled. We couldn't use it in court. If we presented it ACES, any half-decent lawyer would get the entire case thrown out on a technicality, the fruit of the poisonous tree. Karen and her crew would walk and they'd know exactly who would come after them. My quiet life would be over, and my career would be in jeopardy for conducting an off-the-books investigation. We were sitting on a mountain of truth that we couldn't use. Gina Davis and I huddled in my garage. The photos from the storage unit displayed on Gina's laptop screen. The faces of Karen Truman and Barry the treasurer stared back at us from the forged documents. "We need a legal entry point," Davis said, rubbing his tired eyes. "A piece of evidence we obtained by the book. One clean thread we can pull to unravel the whole thing." I knew he was right. We needed an official report, a witness, a piece of probable cause that wasn't tainted by our little break and enter. We could try to get one of the other victims to file a formal complaint. I suggested someone whose car was stolen. We guide them, tell them what to say, who to point the finger at. Gina shook her head. "Too risky. They're just civilians." The tow company's lawyers would tear them apart on the stand and Karen would intimidate them into silence before they even got to the station. She was right. These were not hardened criminals we were dealing with. They were scared homeowners. That's when Officer Miller called me, the rookie from the 9/11 ambush. He'd been calling me once a week since that morning on my porch, ostensibly to ask for advice on case files. But I knew what he was really doing. He was trying to apologize, to make things right. He was a good kid, eager and earnest, with a strong sense of justice that hadn't been ground down by years of bureaucracy yet. "Chief," he said, his voice a little shaky over the phone. I might have something. It's probably nothing, but it's been bugging me." I motioned for Gina and Davis to be quiet. "What is it, Miller?" "Well, sir, after that call at your house, I started paying more attention to the HOA complaints, just keeping an eye out. And there's this one tow company, Reliable Roadside Recovery. Their name keeps popping up. There have been a lot of complaints about them online, too. People saying their cars were towed illegally, that the company is a ghost." I felt a chill go down my spine. The kid had stumbled right into the middle of our investigation, all on his own. "Good work, Miller. That's good instinct. But listen to me. This is bigger than it looks. I want you to stay away from it. Write up what you have, and send it to me directly. Do not engage, do you understand?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Yes, sir. I understand," but there was something in his voice, a hesitation. The eagerness of a rookie wanting to prove himself, toe crack a big case. He wanted to impress the chief who he'd almost arrested. He should have pushed harder, should have ordered him to stand down in no uncertain terms. But I didn't. That was my mistake. 2 days passed. I didn't get a report from Miller. I got busy with department budgets and a city council meeting and I let it slip. Then on Friday night, my personal cell phone rang. It was Miller's number. "Chief." His voice was a whisper, strained and full of static. "I think I found them. The new development, Oakwood. There's a model home at the end of the cul-de-sac. They're using it as a field office. I saw one of the Reliable tow trucks pulling behind it. My blood ran cold. "Miller, where are you right now? Give me your exact location and get out of there." "Now I'm in the trees across the street," he whispered. "I think they're moving a car. A blue sedan? The license plate is?" The line went dead. I called back immediately. It went straight to voicemail. I swore, slamming my fist on the garage workbench. Gina was already at her computer. Her face, a pale, grim mask. His phone's GPS is still active. He's at the new construction site, but he's not moving. The timer started. Every cop knows that feeling. The moment a situation turns from an investigation into a rescue. The moment the clock starts ticking on one of your own. All the careful planning, all the off-the-book secrecy, it was all out the window. One of my officers was in trouble. My officer, my rookie, and it was my fault. I had seen the warning signs, and I hadn't stopped him. "Davis," I barked into the phone. "Meet me at the Oakwood construction site entrance on Mill Road. 10 minutes, no sirens, no radio. Come alone." I hung up before he could answer. I grabbed the heavy-duty mag light from the workbench. It was solid steel and felt reassuringly heavy in my hand. Gina looked at me, her eyes wide with fear, but her hands steady on the keyboard. "I've got the blueprints for the model home. He mentioned the chestnut floor plan," she said. Her voice all business. 2 stories, 4 bedrooms, attached 2-car garage. "I'm patching the schematics to your phone now. I'll stay on comms." I nodded, giving her hand a quick squeeze. "Keep an eye on his GPS. If he moves from that spot, you tell me, immediately." As I ran out the door, my mind was racing. This was the legal entry point we needed, but it was the worst possible kind. Officer missing. It was a blank check. I could call in the entire department. SWAT, helicopters, the works, but that would be a circus. The crew inside that model home would hear us coming a mile away, and Miller's life would be forfeit. We had to go in quiet. We had to go in fast. The careful, methodical chess match with Karen Truman was over. Someone had knocked over the board. Now it was just a street fight in the dark, and one of my men was the prize. The drive to the Oakwood construction site was the longest 5 minutes of my life. The new development was a ghost town after dark, a skeleton of half-finished houses and muddy roads. Street lights weren't installed yet, so the only illumination came from my headlights cutting through the darkness. Davis was waiting for me at the entrance as promised, parked in his unmarked sedan. He got out as I pulled up, his face set like stone. He was holding a tire iron. "Thought this might be more appropriate than my service weapon," he said grimly. "Keeps things quiet." I nodded in agreement. A gunshot would bring the whole world down on us before we had the rookie. "Gina says he's in the model home at the end of the street." "The Chestnut," I said, pulling up the floor plan on my phone. "She's feeding us intel. Let's go." We ditched our cars and moved on foot, sticking to the shadows cast by the skeletal frames of future houses. The air was filled with the smell of cut lumber and damp earth. The model home was the only finished structure on the street. It was lit up like a Christmas tree, a beacon of false welcome in the middle of a dark, muddy field. A single black tow truck, the reliable roadside recovery logo, barely visible on its door, was parked in the driveway, angled toward the garage. "Two men," Gina's voice whispered in my earbud. "I'm picking up their cell signals. One is stationary in what looks like a back bedroom on the first floor. The other is moving around the kitchen and living area." Miller's phone signal was in the same back bedroom. He was with one of the kidnappers. We crept around to the back of the house. The windows were dark, the curtains drawn, but the sliding glass door leading from the kitchen to a small concrete patio was unlocked. A rookie mistake by the kidnappers. They felt safe out here, isolated and alone. We were about to prove them wrong. Davis and I slipped inside, silent as ghosts. The house smelled of new paint and cheap carpet. We were in a generic stage kitchen with plastic fruit in a bowl on the granite countertop. From the adjoining living room, we could hear the low murmur of a television. A large man built like a refrigerator was sitting on a beige sofa, his back to us, watching some action movie. He had a can of beer in one hand. This was our moving target. Davis and I exchanged a look. I pointed to myself, then to the thug. Davis nodded and pointed down the hall toward the back bedroom. We split up. I moved across the plush carpet, my footsteps making no sound. The thug on the couch was completely engrossed in the movie, chuckling at a car explosion on the screen. I was 3 FT behind him when he must have sensed something. He started to turn, his eyes widening in surprise. He surged up, shoulder first. I took the hit, pivoted, and dropped the mag light behind his ear. He grunted and slumped forward, unconscious, spilling his beer on the pristine floor. One down, I moved down the hallway. The door to the back bedroom was slightly ajar. I could hear voices from inside. One was a low, menacing grumble. The other was Officer Miller's, tight with pain. "I'm just a cop," Miller was saying. "I was just checking out a suspicious vehicle." The other voice laughed. "You're a cop who knows too much. Now you're just going to sit tight until our boss decides what to do with you." "And he hates waiting," the man said, tapping the pistol against the chair. I peeked through the crack in the door. Miller was tied to a chair in the middle of the empty room. His face was bruised and there was a trickle of blood from his lip. A wiry thug paced, waving a pistol. Davis came up behind me, silent as smoke. He'd seen the gun, too. We couldn't just rush in. A single panicked shot could kill Miller. We needed a distraction. I looked around the hallway. On a small table was a decorative vase full of fake flowers. It was perfect. I caught Davis's eye and pointed at the vase. Then at the wall opposite the bedroom door. He understood immediately. He picked up the vase and on my silent count of 3, he hurled it against the wall. The vase shattered with a deafening crash. The wiry thug in the bedroom yelled in surprise. "What was that?" "Stay here," he shouted at Miller. And then he made his fatal mistake. He moved toward the door to see what the noise was, stepping right into our trap. The second his head poked out into the hallway, I kicked the door in. It flew open, slamming him against the wall. The gun flew from his hand, clattering across the hardwood floor. Davis was on him in an instant, a knee in his back, cuffing his hands behind him. The fight was over before it really began. It was short, brutal, and clean. I rushed to Miller, cutting him loose with a knife from my pocket. "You okay, kid?" I asked, helping him to his feet. He was shaky but resolute. "I'm fine, Chief. They got my weapon and my radio." He looked at the 2 unconscious or restrained thugs. "How did you?" "We'll talk about it later," I said, clapping him on the shoulder. "Right now, you're the victim of a kidnapping. You were checking on a suspicious vehicle. You were ambushed and you called for backup. Understand?" He nodded, the official story locking into place in his mind. This was our legal entry. We had a victim officer, 2 suspects in custody, and probable cause to search the entire property. The warrant followed fast. An on-call judge signed as soon as Miller was safe. Davis came over holding up the pistol he'd recovered. Standardist issue Glock. Serial numbers are filed off. Heathen held up a wallet he'd taken from the wiry thug. The driver's license inside belonged to a known associate of a local crime family, a specialist in car theft. These weren't just some rough-tow truck drivers. These were professional criminals. Karen Truman and her little HOA scam had gotten into bed with some very dangerous people. She thought she was a queen ruling her little suburban kingdom. She had no idea she was just a pawn in a much larger, much more violent game. And by kidnapping one of my officers, her partners had just declared war on the entire police department. The rescue of Officer Miller was the crack in the dam. Everything we had gathered in the shadows could now be brought into the light, legitimized by a lawful investigation into the kidnapping of a police officer. Within an hour, the model home was swarming with forensics teams and detectives. I stepped back, letting Sergeant Davis take the official lead. To the rest of the department, it was just the chief on scene to oversee the investigation into an assault on one of my men. Only Davis, Gina, and I knew the real story. The 2 thugs we arrested were small-time muscle, and they weren't talking. They lawyered up immediately, which was expected, but their silence didn't matter. They were just the appetizer. Their presence at the model home gave us the legal justification we needed to get warrants for everything. And that's when Gina truly went to work. It was a montage of justice in the making. I sat at my kitchen table, nursing a cup of coffee that had long gone cold as she orchestrated the entire digital investigation from her command center. First came warrants for the model home and the tow office. Signed before sunrise. The search of the model home turned up Miller's stolen service weapon and a stash of burner phones. The search of reliable roadside recovery supposed, a dingy room above a laundromat, yielded a treasure trove. The judge also approved a limited device monitoring order for the bait car, logbooks, GPS trackers from the trucks, and most importantly, a desktop computer. Gina sliced through the computer's password protection in under 5 minutes. They used password 123, she said with a dismissive shake of her head. Amateurs. On the hard drive, she found the originals, the templates for the fake HOA violation notices, the forged tow authorizations, and a detailed spreadsheet of every vehicle they had stolen over the past year, complete with notes on where the cars were sold or what parts were harvested. It was a complete confession in digital form. One work order even listed Oakwood's project code in the memo. Next, she used the evidence from the computer to get a warrant for the HOA's main office. I sent Davis and a uniform team to execute it. They seized computers, filing cabinets, and the office printer. This was the moment I'd been waiting for. I called in a favor from the head of our forensics lab. I need a toner analysis, I told him. Compare the toner from the HOA's printer with the toner from the fake violation notices we've been collecting. The call came back 3 hours later. It's a perfect match, Chief. Not just the same brand, the exact same chemical batch. These notices were printed on that machine. We now had a direct physical link between the criminal conspiracy and Karen Truman's office. But the final nail in the coffin came from the money. Armed with the tow company's spreadsheet and the receipt book we'd photographed in the storage unit, we got a warrant for the bank records of the HOA. Oakwood Development, Karen Truman, and the treasurer, Barry Jenkins. Gina, who used to do freelance work in forensic accounting, lit up. She spent a day mapping the flow of money. It was a beautiful, simple, and utterly damning picture. Oakwood Development would make large lump sum payments to the HOA for community improvement projects. Most of that money would go into the HOA's general fund, but a small specific percentage, always 15%, would be siphoned off by Barry Jenkins into a separate account. From that account, he would make regular cash withdrawals. Fee dates and amounts of those withdrawals matched the cash payments to the tow ring enforcers perfectly. And then there was the icing on the cake, a series of direct bank transfers from Barry's slush fund to a personal account belonging to Karen Truman. The memo line on each transfer was the same consulting fee. She was getting a cut, a big one. She wasn't just a puppet, Gina said, spinning in her chair to face me. She was a willing partner. She provided the legal cover and the targets. Barry cooked the books and the developers' thugs did the dirty work. And they all got rich. We had it all. Rinkum clips, toner match, hard drive originals, bank transfers. We could prove the entire chain of command from the muscle on the street all the way up to Karen. We had enough to put them all away for a very long time on charges of racketeering, conspiracy, grand theft auto, and thanks to Miller, kidnapping. But there was one thing that still bothered me. George Karen's sniveling entitled son. His name wasn't on any of the bank records. He wasn't in any of the logbooks. He was a ghost. Yet I knew with a gut certainty that only comes from 30 years of police work that he was the key. His desire for my car was the spark that started this whole fire. Karen was ruthless and greedy, but she was also a doing mother. I suspected this whole scheme wasn't just about the money for her. It was about giving her worthless son everything he ever wanted, including a classic muscle car he didn't deserve. The case was solid, but I wanted them caught in the act and the neighborhood to see it. And I knew there was only one thing that would draw both Karen and George out into the open. One thing they couldn't resist: my dad's car. I looked over at Gina. They've tried to steal my car twice now and failed. I think it's time we let them succeed. The idea of using my dad's car as bait felt like a betrayal. It was the last pure thing he'd left me, and I was about to roll it into a den of thieves. But the cleanest way was simple: catch their hands in the cookie jar on tape. I wanted to see the look on her face when the trap sprung. This had gone far beyond a simple criminal case. For me, it had become a question of moral certainty. When do you accept that some people are just too far gone? Karen had answered that for me. Now, I needed to provide the consequences. Gina understood what I was feeling. She came and stood behind me in the garage, placing a hand on my shoulder as I stared at the car under its cover. "Your dad would understand, Frank," she said softly. "He'd want you to use it to protect people like Tony. It's just metal and paint. What he gave you, the important part, is inside you." She was right. Of course, she always was. The car wasn't the memory. It was just a container for it. "All right," I said, my voice. "Let's wire it up." The plan was simple, but it had to be executed perfectly. We couldn't use standard police department equipment. It was too bulky, too easy to spot. This required Gina's delicate touch. For the next 2 nights, we worked in the garage with the door shut and the lights low. Gina, with her slender fingers and a jeweler's set of tools, performed surgery on the Mustang's dashboard. She installed a micro GPS tracker, no bigger than Adam, inside the speedometer housing. It was powered directly by the car's battery, so it would never die. Next came the audio. She carefully removed the original AM radio from the dash. It was a heavy, obsolete piece of metal. Behind it, she mounted a state-of-the-art voice-activated microphone with a cellular transmitter. "It's military-grade," she explained, carefully soldering a wire. "It can distinguish between engine noise and human speech. It will broadcast a crystal-clear audio feed directly to a secure server." I consented as the owner, and we'd seek a monitoring order once the kidnapping case opened. "We'll be able to hear every word they say inside that car." I watched her work, a mix of pride and anxiety churning in my gut. She was a genius, a ghost in the machine who could bend technology to her will. While she handled the tech, I handled the bait. I knew I couldn't just leave the car on the street with the keys in it. That would be entrapment. I had to make them think they were getting away with something, that they were outsmarting me. I needed a pretense. The annual HOA Gala was in 3 days. It was the biggest social event of the year in our little community, held in a large tent on the community green. The theme was building our future, and the guest of honor was the CEO of Oakwood Development. It was the perfect stage. It started a rumor. I told neighbor Tony, knowing he was the neighborhood's most efficient gossip network, that I was finally giving up. I told him this HOA pressure was too much, and that I'd be putting the Mustang up for sale after the weekend. I let him see me taking pictures of it with my phone as if preparing an online ad. I even printed a for sale sign and tucked it under the windshield wiper with a fake phone number that routed to a burner phone on my desk. The bait was laid. I was counting on George's impatience and Karen's arrogance. I was betting they wouldn't wait for me to sell it. They'd want to take it to rub my nose in their victory. The day of the gala, I made my final move. I accidentally left the garage door open a few inches when I left to run errands. Tucked just inside, barely visible from the street, was a spare key to the Mustang hanging on a magnetic hook. It was a rookie mistake, something a stressed-out homeowner trying to sell a car might do. It was an invitation. Karen's emails, subpoenaed later, would show the plan, call it a community donation, then bill insurance for loss. She'd even drafted detonation press blurb. That night, we got ready for the gala. I put on a suit that felt tight in the shoulders, and Gina wore a simple black dress that made her look like a spy in a Bond movie. As we were about to leave, Sergeant Davis arrived in uniform. He wouldn't be attending the party. He and a hand-picked team of 4 plane officers would be our backup, parked in an unmarked van a block away, monitoring our comms. "Vestige is set, Chief," he said, handing me a small, discreet earpiece. "We're ready," I looked at Gina. "Ready for this?" She smiled, a flash of the fierce woman I'd fallen in love with all those years ago. "They have no idea what's coming," she said. We walked out the door and headed toward the gala, leaving my house, my garage, and my father's car vulnerable. It felt like walking into a battle unarmed, but we weren't unarmed. Our weapons were just smaller. They were microphones, GPS trackers, and the enemy's own arrogance. We were about to watch them walk witlessly and willingly right into the center of a web we had so carefully built. The night of the HOA Gala was dark and stormy. A heavy autumn rain drummed against the roof of the massive white tent on the community green, muffling the sounds of the bad jazz trio playing inside. It was the perfect weather for a sting. The rain would keep most people from wandering around outside, and the noise would cover our movements. We slipped in. Packed house, neighbors in their shine. At the head table, holding court, was Karen Truman. She was wearing a sparkling silver dress, looking every bit the queen of her domain. Next to her, looking smug and self-satisfied, was the CEO of Oakwood Development. Barry the treasurer was there too, sweating in his oversized tuxedo and avoiding eye contact with everyone. George was nowhere to be seen. That was a good sign. Gina and I got drinks and blended into the crowd, positioning ourselves near one of the main tent poles where we had a clear view of the stage and the entrance. My earpiece was silent. Gina had her phone in her hand, disguised as if she were just checking her messages, but I knew she was monitoring the live feed from the Mustang's GPS. The car was still in my garage. The trap hadn't been sprung yet. The waiting was the hardest part. For an hour we mingled. We listened to Karen give a self-congratulatory speech about the neighborhood's success, thanking Oakwood Development for their generous partnership. It was all I could do not to laugh. Then my earpiece crackled to life. It was Gina, her voice low and steady, even though she was standing right next to me. It was a direct feed from her phone to me. "We have movement," she said. The garage door sensor just tripped. Someone's inside. My heart started pounding. I took a slow sip of my water, keeping my face a mask of bored indifference. "GPS is active," she continued. "The car is moving. It's pulling out of the driveway." I scanned the room. Karen was still at the head table, but she kept glancing at her phone, a tight little smile on her face. She was in on it. She was coordinating it. "They're on the road," Gina whispered. "Heading this way." The plan was in motion. Now all we had to do was wait for the delivery. 10 minutes later, Karen tapped the microphone on the podium, calling for everyone's attention. "And now for a very special surprise," she announced, her voice dripping with fake enthusiasm. "Our partners at Oakwood Development believe so strongly in this community that they wanted to make a special donation. A new vehicle for our security patrol." As if on cue, the tent flaps at the main entrance were pulled back. The headlights of a car cut through the rainy darkness. And then my dad's 1969 Boss 429, its candy apple red paint gleaming under the gallow lights, rolled slowly and majestically into the tent. Behind the wheel, grinning from ear to ear, was George Truman. A gasp went through the crowd. My neighbors knew that car. They'd seen it in my driveway for months. They looked from the car to me, their faces a mixture of confusion and shock. I kept my expression neutral. This was the moment of truth. "Let's give a hand to George Truman," Karen said, applauding loudly, "for securing this wonderful donation for our community." This was her story. Her clever son had convinced the new guy to donate his car. She was trying to spin the theft into a triumph. That's when Gina made her move. She lifted her phone and tapped once. Per the judge's order, the in-car audio, George on speaker with Karen, poured through the tent. Her own words filled the room. "He's gone. Good. The key is on the hook. Drive it straight to the gala. We'll file it as a donation tomorrow." The crowd fell silent. Karen's smile froze, color draining. I gave her a small, cold smile. "That mic picks up lies in stereo," I said. George, still sitting in the driver's seat of the idling Mustang, looked terrified. The recording continued, now playing the audio from inside the car as he drove it over. It was George talking to himself. "Stupid old cop thinks he's so smart. This car is mine now. Finally, something cool." Panic erupted. Karen started stammering into the microphone. That's a doctored tape. It's a lie." The CEO from Oakwood Development was already trying to slip out a side entrance, but he was met by two of Davis's Planelo officers who calmly but firmly escorted him back inside. George, in a complete panic, stomped on the gas. The 429 roared tires spun on slick vinyl. The car lunged for the head. I didn't hesitate. I ran forward, vaulting over a table of Horervas, and put myself directly in the car's path. I knew the car. I knew George didn't. He wouldn't know how to handle that much power. The car fish-tailed wildly. I reached the driver's side door, wrenched it open, and grabbed George by the collar of his ridiculous tuxedo shirt. I hauled him out of the driver's seat and threw him onto the ground. The car, driverless, stalled and rolled to a stop, inches from Karen's podium. The tent was in chaos, but then the main flaps opened again. Sergeant Davis walked in, followed by 4 uniformed officers. Red-blue washed the tent. The party was officially over. Davis walked straight to Karen. "Karen Truman," he said, his voice booming through the silent tent. "You're under arrest for conspiracy, insurance fraud, and grand theft auto." As the cuffs clicked onto her wrists, her composure finally broke. She started to cry. Not tears of remorse, but tears of pure, undiluted rage at being caught. Davis's officers arrested a sputtering Barry Jenkins. I picked George up off the floor and handed him over to another officer. "And this one is all yours," he said. The neighbors were all standing there, their mouths open, watching the pillars of their community being led away in handcuffs. My dad's car sat there idling and safe, the silent chrome-covered star of the whole show. The aftermath was swift. With Karen, George, and Barry cuffed, the house of cards collapsed. Barry took one look at the evidence pile and sang. He laid out the scheme. HOA fines to mark targets, reliable roadside to yank the cars, Oakwood to wash them into fleet. In return, the board got greased, and Karen got her pet projects fast-tracked, closed loop, open and shut. The developer, used to steamrolling city halls, folded at the word racketeering. He handed over ledgers and emails. Karen, proud to the bitter end, refused a deal. The jury listened to the Gladio, read the bank trails, and needed less than 2 hours. Guilty? 10 years. George, framed as a coddled follower, landed probation and community service. The humiliation stuck harder than the sentence. The neighborhood got its spine back. A judge put the HOA into receivership. Auditors traced every fake fine and every lost vehicle. Oakwood seized fund paid everyone back. Tools, trucks, dignity. Tony rolled up in a new pickup, grinning like he'd won the lottery. "Coffee," he said, "and donuts if you're twisting my arm." I took the coffee. We held a special election. No tyrants, just neighbors. Tony became president. First motion, nuke section 8.3c. The non-operational vehicle rule went into history's shredder. Block parties replaced binoculars. "Hello, community." A few weeks later, Gina and I stood in the garage. The boss sat there quiet and read and right. On the bench, the title that had been trapped in legal limbo. My dad had signed it years ago. I hadn't finished the job. Gina handed me a pen. "It's time, Frank." I looked at my father's name, the slope of the letters I knew by heart. For a long time, I'd avoided this line. Like writing it meant goodbye. It didn't. It meant carry on. I signed Frank Dillon. Gina smiled. Now it's official. A weight I didn't know I was still carrying slid off my shoulders. I looked at the car. My car. Our car. "Let's tackle that carburetor," I said. "First step," I added, "teach what a torque wrench is." Gina snorted. "Community service can handle that." She tapped the title. "Torque it to spec," she said, unlike their bylaws. The silence we moved here for finally returned. No tempty, earned. And if Karen's ghost ever wondered what became of her kingdom, the answer was simple. It became a neighborhood,